Cyberpunk 2077 just turned 8 months old, which is actually pretty insane when you think about how much has actually been added in by updates, really how little has been added in by some of these updates. Fortunately though, in those 8 months, the modding tools have been getting more and more advanced, and over the past couple of months in particular, we've been seeing some really next level mods for Cyberpunk 2077. So in this video, what I want to show you is an assortment of mods that on one half are either fixing consistent broken issues with the game that CDPR hasn't yet gotten to, actually adding in some cut features back into the game, or even towards the end of this video, I have a couple of larger scale mods that will probably get you interested in doing yet another playthrough for this game, as they rework or rebalance some of the systems and create a more interesting gameplay loop overall. And of course, if you guys do want to get subscribed, it will keep you all up to date with patch 1.3 whenever that is eventually coming out. We currently don't really know, or even some of the DLCs. But first and foremost, let's take a look at enhanced police. Police in Cyberpunk 2077 are probably one of the most criticized features. They're just kind of bad by default, just spawning out of nowhere slightly far away. Well, what is easily one of the best mods to actually fix this is enhanced police, and it's been getting consistent updates and even more notably in a way bug fixes, so it's in its most stable version yet. So this mod will add in a few new mechanics around police, but the biggest being police, depending on the star level you have, will now spawn in different types of vehicles. Not exclusively, they'll also spawn on foot, but you might see a cop roll up to you on a motorcycle or in a police car or in a police SUV with some of his buddies, depending again on how many stars you have. This just makes the cops feel so much more natural, actually see them drive up to you or even chase you down in a vehicle, not just chase you on foot for whatever reason. In the past, there was definitely some issues around crashing or glitchiness with this, but again, it does seem like it is in its most stable version yet. I had 0 crashes while filming this video, which is actually probably a first on a Cyberpunk mod video, but also it does some other things like making it so police will continue to chase you in unlimited waves. By default, if you just stand in place and take out all of the cops, eventually they'll just stop coming. This rectifies that. And also, the higher your wanted level, the more police will be looking for you. So if you do have a full 4-star wanted level, you can't just go around the corner and be safe. They're gonna hunt you down a little bit longer, and you're gonna have to do a bit more effort to actually lose it. Overall, a really great one. I would say probably a must download for Cyberpunk 2077 to properly experience the game. Another one that's actually relevant as of late is street vendors. So there's this interesting discovery recently where if you have a disc version of Cyberpunk and you put it into your Xbox or PlayStation and don't allow the game to update, you'll be playing an older version of the game which actually has some features that aren't in the later versions or more updated versions of the game. One of them is working street vendors, and basically this mod will add that back in. All those random miscellaneous vendors throughout Night City that technically do nothing, but now with this mod you could shop around Night City, walk up to one, and quite seamlessly just buy some stuff from it. Their inventories are thematic for the vendor itself. Honestly, more so than buying, I find selling stuff to these people is pretty helpful. Like if you just see one on the side of the street, you run up, sell a few of the things you don't want, and get some eddies instead of the carry weight. Although speaking of driving around, another great mod that I think is also going to be a must download for me is Cyberdrive. I'm really surprised this just completely ran under my radar for as long as it did, as at this point I've tried most of the very popular driving overhaul mods for Cyberpunk, and I think this is the best one. And I think one of the reasons for that is it feels the most like Grand Theft Auto 5 driving, which is obviously a big positive for a lot of people, especially compared to that on ice driving you have by default in Cyberpunk. So it's pretty hard to verbalize what this actually feels like, but I would say in a nutshell, it just makes it feel like the cars have a lot more grip and a lot more appropriate weight to them. When I was driving with this mod installed, it just felt like things were more predictable. The vehicle was doing what I expected it to, more so when compared to other video games. I wasn't accidentally spinning out unless I was intentionally trying to do that. Overall, of course, this type of stuff is going to be really subjective. There are other driving mods out there, but for me, again, this is the best one and definitely the one I've had the most fun with and will be keeping installed going forward. But a mod that will likely help you go faster through Cyberpunk 2077 on a subsequent playthrough is a pretty interesting one. That with remove player speed scaling. So I didn't even realize this was a thing, but technically in Cyberpunk, when you level up your character, not any specific skills, but just your character level overall, you actually sprint faster. So my level 50 will sprint faster than my level 2 character, as you can see in this video, which is just odd. More or less what this mod will do is decouple that from your level. You download a certain file version, so you could have it so it's just always level 50 speed, it's always immediate medium speed, and I feel like it just makes a lot more sense. Like, why would you just sprint faster for no reason? It's not like it's based on the athletic skill, which would make a lot more sense, but just because you're leveling up, could run faster, I guess. Overall, kind of a small one, going to be pretty subjective, but I think it's an improvement, and obviously going faster earlier on is oftentimes helpful. Another really nice one that just came out for Cyberpunk 2077 is improved minimap zoom. There's been a couple of mods and a lot of criticism around the default minimap in Cyberpunk, and I actually think this is the best mod thus far, as what it's going to do is dynamically change your minimap depending on where you are, whether you're in combat, a quest area, but even more importantly, depending on the speed you are driving. And this is the part I really love about this one. So just by getting into a car, it will change, but as you speed up, the minimap zooms out more because you're going faster and it's going to be easier to miss that upcoming turn. To me, this is just the best. It does have several situations where it will switch around in game, whether it be stealth, quest, etc. But in particular, the driving feature of this one is what gets me using it and really enjoying it, actually just making the game a lot easier. It does suffer from the same glitches that all the other minimap mods do suffer from, where it does get flickery at points. In fact, in some of the leaked dev videos, we saw that they actually had the same problem, so it seems like this might just be a fundamental issue, probably why the minimap is so zoomed in by default. But I still think even with the flickering, being able to actually see and make your turn is a big upgrade. But speaking of things we've seen in past videos, we also do have wall hang. During that initial gameplay video for Cyberpunk, there was actually this point where somebody with mantis blades was able to insert them in the wall and basically just hang there. Pretty cool feature, but something that never ended up happening in the game, and more or less this mod will add that back in, except not requiring mantis blades. So basically now, jumping around a wall, you can actually hold a key and force yourself to stick to that wall. There's also a functionality where if you hit jump key while facing a wall, you'll kind of reverse and jump off the wall. It's one of those things that's kind of small, but I actually kind of like having that cut feature back in. The vast majority of the time, I probably won't use it, but there's a couple of instances while you're playing, especially in combat, where you could get kind of a cool or interesting angle by using this. And with all the other crazy technology in Cyberpunk, this one in particular doesn't really feel all that ridiculous or overpowered. So in that first half of the video, I was focusing more on mods that were either adding in cut features or just enhancing or improving aspects of the game. But now in the second half, I really want to focus on some mods that will enhance the game with subsequent playthroughs. Actually reinvent or add in new features to keep the game interesting and fresh if you're playing it a second time or even a third, fourth, or fifth time. The first one we have is going to hit on a major criticism, and that is life path bonuses and gang corp traits. This mod does a wide variety of things in an attempt to make the world of Night City have just more character, more diversity from one character to another, or even more consequence for your life path choice in the beginning. So right off the bat, what it's going to do at its core is make it so the various gangs, corpos, or other organizations in Night City now actually have specific traits to their characters. So just as one example, the Voodoo Boys will now be immune to ultimate hacks. So those hacks that would just one-shot take down most enemies, they won't work on Voodoo Boys. They'll be errored out if you try and use them. It actually will take longer to hack them and cost more RAM to hack them in general. And when hacking them with demons that aren't ultimate hacks even, they will deal less damage overall. This of course being styled around them thematically. Kind of makes sense that they would probably have the best resistances and most prepared to deal with hacks in Cyberpunk. On the complete opposite side of things with the animals, a pretty big change is the animals can no longer be grappled with. If you sneak up behind one, you cannot just grab them from behind. I mean, honestly, this one does kind of make a lot of sense. He is like 4 times the size of V. Kind of makes sense that you can't just manhandle him at will. But even further, they have more resistance to melee in general and even will bypass 25% of your armor when attacking you because they are so strong physically. And then for some of the corps, you get even more extreme versions of this, like with Militech. They're completely immune to damage hacks as a category. You cannot use damaging hacks on these guys anymore. They have advanced armor, making them immune to electrocution, and reinforced helmets, making them even more resistant to headshots. Tech damage also in general will deal less to them. These are just a few of the examples, but what this really does and serves to do is make it so you have to strategize a bit more depending on the enemy type. Or I guess I shouldn't necessarily say you have to. At the end of the day, whatever you're doing, 95% of the time will still work. Obviously with some of these, if you can't use a damaging hack like on Militech, you will have to resort to weapons. And I know some of you may think that's kind of extreme, but it also just makes the game and the way you approach certain situations a lot more interesting and feel a lot more RPG-like. The same way we are cybernetically enhancing our body bodies and doing crazy things, these other factions are also, and this makes it really feel that way when you are completely cut off from certain damage paths and forced to use something else. I honestly think it's a ton of fun, again, especially on a second playthrough. It just requires you to think a bit more when you have to divert from your typical path. But even further, this has a life path mechanic also, so depending on which life path you choose, you will have buffs or debuffs against certain enemies. So like, let's say you're a Corpo, naturally you're going to be more familiar with other Corpos, and in turn will have buffs against them. You'll have a slightly faster upload time for hacks, as well as a lower RAM cost in general. You'll get less street cred for taking down other Corpos, but more money because you'll know it's valuable when you loot them, and even a slight damage multiplier, so you'll deal more damage to things of the same type. This will generalize for each of the different life paths, so if you're a street kid, obviously it'd be against some of the gangs. If you're a Corpo, corporations, and a nomad, against those nomad gangs. And then conversely, if it's a different type, like a Corpo against a gang, you will have some debuffs against them and deal less damage or have things take a bit longer. Overall, I really love this one. I think it's just a really fun and cool mod. I think it mixes up the game in an interesting way while not completely changing it. You're still largely playing the same game, but now it has a bit more flavor at every other corner. There's also two optional aspects to this, but I think pretty cool add-ons in general. For whatever reason, by default, armor was not working properly. It didn't actually work against melee weapons. Now it does. And even further, there's this interesting mechanic where quick hack upload speed is scaled by distance. So enemy netrunners, when trying to hack you, will upload much faster when they're closer to you versus much slower the further they are away. Again, both of those are optional, but I think pretty cool mechanics that you can turn off if you're not interested. So that's overhauling and upgrading the combat encounters overall. But another pretty cool one that we have is street style. As you could probably guess, this is going to improve and kind of overhaul the fashion system and your clothing choices in Cyberpunk. As what this will do is, for all of the various pieces of clothing in the game, it'll now actually have certain attribute stats associated with it. So you can see as I highlight certain pieces of things, you'll see a certain listing for body, cool, tech, etc., but also one of the distinctive styles of Night City that were actually introduced in that style video. And basically what this is going to do is give certain bonuses to your character depending on which clothing types you wear, with also a set bonus if you are wearing all of the same type from a certain style. So for example, if you're wearing all neo-militarism, you will get a bonus as a result, in addition to the individual attribute bonuses, which are calculated based off what you're wearing. So of course, on one hand, this will most notably impact this when you're actually in dialogue, enhancing skill checks, and you can see this on display. But even further, and perhaps in some instances more handy, it's actually going to impact it in combat and some of those use situations in the world of Cyberpunk. It's one of those ones that at first glance may have a relatively small impact, but across an entire playthrough, it really changes up your decision making when choosing what to wear. It's not just the flat armor bonus anymore. It now adds in another interesting mechanic in one, which style is it, but even further, the stat bonuses. Does the armor bonus actually matter or offset the stat bonuses you might be losing from one piece to another? So overall, it's a pretty cool one, and again, kind of one you don't have to pay a ton of attention to if you don't want to. You could kind of just ignore this and still wear whatever you want. But then that theme of overhauling the game, we also do have full weapon rebalance, which, as the title of this one does suggest, it is really a quite comprehensive rebalance of basically all of the weapons and weapon types in this game. And in addition to balance, it also includes some bug fixes, or I guess technically changes. It's not really clear if it's a bug or a feature with some things with Cyberpunk. Like for example, the mantis blades just stop scaling past your level by level 30, so they'll no longer scale with your level. They will always stay at level 30. This raises it to level 50, which in turn is a buff, giving them better stats. But to name some of the more interesting and notable ones, those emplaced heavy machine gun turrets that you could actually physically rip off and shoot enemies with got a huge buff. I mean, if you're ripping this thing off and carrying it around, it should probably be worth it, right? Well, now it is, and it deals devastating amounts of damage, and it's definitely one of the more OP things, but it does have a very limited ammo capacity, and again, it's a limited time use. You have to find it and actually get to use it. The projectile launcher cyberware in general got a bit of an overhaul. It now deals more damage against enemies, but even further, the trank rounds now are not just a one-shot stun, which is how it was by default. Instead, it has a % chance to stun enemies and deals area of effect damage, but it's not always going to completely take somebody out in one hit. Some of the high rate of fire weapons now cause less flinch, so if you're spraying someone with something high rate of fire, they'll actually have an opportunity to fight back. Previously, they would just kind of be stuck flinching there. The charged tech weapons aren't nearly as OP as before. Before, they were just really devastating, think now it's been toned down quite a bit if you don't have the appropriate perks in particular. There's lots of miscellaneous changes around damage of some weapon categories or another to make them more competitive, so buffing up things and nerfing down other things to kind of make things more viable across the board. One of the other pretty cool features of this one is it makes the damage a bit higher at lower levels. There's kind of these weird balance choices by CDPR where at early levels you'd have like a 0% crit chance, you'd have basically 0 headshot multipliers. This rectifies that and makes the damage overall a bit more linear. Previously it was like all of a sudden at level 20 the game became really fun. Now hopefully that'll happen a lot earlier. Silencers have some new effects, so you could actually have silencers that will give you crit chance or crit damage, just making them way more viable. Previously I basically ignored these, but now I actually pay attention. It more evenly distributes certain weapon effects overall. Like some of the weapon effects in this game, like increased charge time by 50%, were just super rare just because. You just had to hope to get that on a weapon drop somehow. Now it makes it so some of the very powerful effects are more common on rarer weapons. So if you have like a legendary weapon, it's more common to find that effect, but it's unlikely to appear on some of the lower tier weapons, and a ton of other bug fixing and balance changing that I'm not even mentioning, like the LMG slots actually working again, because previously those are bugged. Overall, it's a really great one. I think a great one to add again on a subsequent playthrough because it mixes up a lot of aspects of this game, and you could go in blind or read the entire blurb like I did, but especially when going in blind, I think it just makes you find some interesting things to discover it naturally of what's powerful and not on this new playthrough. Which, speaking of, in yet again another similar vein, we do have one final one with HERX Overhaul. This is a really awesome one. Another one that there's no way I could comprehensively talk about. It'd probably be a 20-minute video in its own right, but one of the pretty frustrating things with Cyberpunk 2077 is there was a lot of perks that technically weren't broken, but were basically just dead on arrival with the release of this game because they just sucked. Like the feature it actually added to the game wasn't that useful, so you'd never really want to take the perk, and there's been no balance changing thus far in the 8 months since release. But as you could imagine, this mod will do that rebalancing for us. When it comes to stealth perks, one of the big changes this brings is it makes it so you can be an absolute god with stealth, but you actually have to remain undetected. Previously with a lot of the perks, you just had to be sneaking, not undetected. This makes it so undetected, but also massive amounts of damage is a playstyle. It fixes that god-awful throwing knife perk where before you would just lose a knife when you threw it. Now it makes it so when you throw a knife, it'll automatically equip another knife you might have in your inventory, but also when you walk near your thrown knife, you just automatically pick it up and equip it again. Tons of perks were just completely reworked. Like the cheat death is totally reworked. Now once per minute, when an enemy sees you, they are temporarily blind, giving you a second chance. The commando perk used to make it so you couldn't be detected underwater. Now just make it so you have a flat increase to crit damage, making it way more valuable. The cold blood tree got reworked quite a bit, making it so it's not nearly as OP early on. Before it was just a must take basically, but cold blood becomes a complete killer if you spec into it properly. Some perks got reworked, making them far more predictable and usable, like Burn Baby Burn now gives burning damage to the shotguns and LMGs. Previously it just made it so if you did have something that gave a burn effect, it would last twice as long, but now with this perk it just makes you really want to prioritize the perks in that tree in that weapon type, which I feel like is the whole idea behind these in general. It makes it make a lot more sense. Some of the crafting perks got a cool change. Those perks that actually unlocked the ability to craft epics or legendaries will now give you bonuses also, and specifically bonuses to crafted weapons. So now a crafted weapon will always be better than one you just find, which is probably how it always should have been. The crazy science perk is a near must take now. Previously it just made it so when you sell a crafted item you get 10% more money, which obviously isn't that good, but now it makes it so all weapons and clothing will scale to your level, including new stuff you pick up. Obviously it's going to take a while to work your way to that perk in that level, but that is a really good functionality, and that's just to name some of what this mod does. Obviously at this point it's not quite complete or comprehensive, as it is still a work in progress. It actually just got an update 4 days ago, but even in its current version it's a huge improvement in my eyes over what's there by default. And overall, yeah, that's a good summation of some of the best mods to come out for Cyberpunk 2077 over the past few months or so, and hopefully a good balance of some things to fix things, adding in new features and overhauls to the game to get you interested in playing again. Hopefully you guys found this one informative. I have a ton of fun making these videos, testing out all these kinds of mods. With that said, I hope to see you all next time. Later.